The ocean is much deeper than we thought. They told me you were inexperienced in harsh waters, James said as he pointed out the pools of sweat that had formed on my forehead. Yeah, I do, I replied, moments before hurling the remains of a less than appetizing lunch off the side of our ship. It's just that you look a bit of green around the gills, he continued with a smirk. We just met a few hours ago. I'd been airlifted by the USS Orion, a sea lift handling abyssal transport capsules for a classified project conducted by the United States Navy. I guess they failed to mention that I'm much better underwater in submarines, I shot back. Considering the circumstances, his casual demeanor left an uncomfortable atmosphere among the workers. They all knew what my visits entailed, but just like myself, they were scant with information. All I knew was that there might be a contagious infection at the bottom of the ocean, and my job was to either to disprove it or confine the entire crew aboard the station. As soon as we were positioned securely on top of the Tonga Trench, we were rushed into the transport capsule, a minuscule vertical submarine designed simply to take us to the base of the ocean floor, 20,000 feet below us. Talos. I entered the sub, feeling excited, while also dreading the return to the deep blue. It had been 10 years since serving as a hospital corpsman, one of the few actually stationed aboard a submarine. Over the years, I had clearly lost the natural sense I once had for the ocean, yet I longed desperately for it. "Whenever you are ready, Doc," one of the crew members said, impatiently waiting to drop us into the abyss. I raised my thumb. "As ready as I'll ever be. Go ahead." 10 feet, the twilight zone. The impact with the ocean lightly shook the capsule. As we submerged, the nausea quickly diminished, and a sense of peace washed over my mind. I was back. Outside the window, a few curious fish accompanied our journey downwards. Various sea life attracted by the cargo ship, following to see us off. James piloted the miniature sub, having done the trip 1,000 times before. It wasn't anything new to him. Myself? I'd never been below 2,000 feet, and never had I been able to look through the window and admire the most unexplored blue world. 3,300 feet, the midnight zone. As we sank deeper towards the abyss, the last rays of sunshine vanished. We had left the realm of sunshine and mankind, and all in favor of the domain of darkness. "First time seeing the abyss, right?" James asked after a long bout of silence. "Yeah, served aboard a submarine for a few years, but they never go very deep. This is something else." He smiled at me. "Well, you're in for a treat then. We're going all the way down. Talos sits right at the edge of the trench. Ain't nothing quite like it." Any sea life once curious about our sub had long since retreated towards the brighter areas. The rapidly increasing pressure had proven hostile to most, but some resilient little creatures had found a way to thrive in places once thought to be lifeless. The miracles of the ocean. Within an hour, we had reached the depths of 10,000 feet. Beyond the 15-inch glass pane separating us from a certain depth lied nothing but everlasting darkness. For all we knew, the two of us could have never been all that excited in that void, if not for the sounds of the outer hull settling under the pressure and constant reminder about the vastness of the ocean. To distance myself from the unsettling creaking sound, I asked James about the only thing I could think of. "Why don't you tell me more about what happened down there?" James had acted casually that far, but my question quickly changed his nonchalant expression to a frown. "They believed you on the surface, didn't they?" "Of course, but then that will have to do," he said firmly. 13,100 feet. The abyssal zone. The world outside hypnotized me, staring so far into nothing, knowing there would be a full world only for a couple of feet before you was bizarre. I never experienced true darkness until today, and to think a good portion of Earth's life had existed within of millions of years terrified me. When I served aboard the USS Kentuckia, my captain explained why they don't put windows on submarines. He told stories about shipmates going crazy after years at sea, that the isolation or distance from the mainland never bothered any of them. He firmly believed that staring into the ocean and pondering from its secrets was what truly drove men from their sanity. And to combat this, they never put windows on the vessels. Though it was clearly a tale he made up, seeing what truly lies beyond the surface brought back these memories. Maybe he was right after all. My sinister thoughts were interrupted by a dim light appearing in the distance. A red dot dancing blissfully up and down, getting closer to us up. It was like a jellyfish. "Would you look at that?" James said as he pointed at the little creature. So fragile, yet defying in deep sea pressure. Another light joined in, then a few more, and before long a symphony of pulsating crimson lights formed around the capsule, welcoming us with the warmth of thousands of stars, making up their own little galaxy thousands of feet below the surface. It was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. A bloom of jellyfish, happily existing in such hostile conditions. I couldn't help but feel impressed. "They're called Atolla jellyfish," James stated. "They don't usually venture this far down, but there's something about this place that seemed to attract them. I usually see a few on my journeys down here, but never anything like this." I just nodded in response, too mesmerized by the sight to notice what he said, but as quickly as they had appeared, they vanished, once more leaving us in absolute darkness. "Listen, Doc, I'm sorry about the outburst earlier," James said. I turned towards him, turning my back to the darkness for the first time. It made me feel vulnerable. "You gotta understand, this ain't something we usually deal with, and Mike, well, I've known him most of my life. I know how much this sucks, believe me. I'm just trying to get as much info as possible, for all of our sakes," I said. "Yeah, well, there's nothing I could tell you anyway. The airlock has been on lockdown for the past 2 days, and we've been under strict orders not to open it until you deem it safe to do so." I didn't ask any further questions. I deal with contagious ever since leaving the Navy, and 19% of the time there were simple overreactions. 90,700 feet, the ocean basin. For the first time since we left the ship, the radio came to life, emitting a static sound, one that slowly took the shape of a man's voice. "James, can you hear me?" a voice asked. "Loud and clear, Captain. I've got our man from the CDC with me as well. We're just about ready to dock." "Great, the crew is getting impatient. The radio started breaking up. "Oh damn, the radio is... Dock at Section A, don't..." It shut off completely. "Welcome to the Abyssal Zone," James said. "The radio has been acting strange lately. Imagine giving us a state-of-the-art station. It comes from last millennium." Through the window we could see a massive dome lit up by hundreds of lights. 3 paths stretched from its center, each lit up by different colors, making sectors A, B, and C. There was something else lit up by the station's light. At first, just obscured figures leaving shadows in the sand, but as we got closer, I realized there were fish. Hundreds, if not thousands of dead sea creatures littering the ocean beds, their corpses mangled with the intense pressure. "Christ! What the hell is up with the fish?" I asked, horrified. "Same as the Atolla. Something attracts them down here. They swim until their bodies break under the pressure, then they sink." What could possibly do that? There are a few theories, but from what we can tell, it's the sound that we periodically hear from the trench. The docking process in itself took quite some time. The outer hull had changed ever so slightly due to the high pressure, just enough so that fitting into the station proved a challenge. As the doors finally opened, I stumbled outside the capsule, greeted by 3 of the crew members aboard. "You're the doctor, right?" the oldest of them asked. "That's correct," I said, as he reached out his hand to introduce himself. "Name's Robert Lewis. I'm the captain assigned to Talos," he said as he shook my hand. "Thank you for coming this far. I know it's not the most pleasant journey." He seemed polite enough, though clearly sleep-deprived, with bloodshot eyes and greasy hair. "This is Jennifer Burke, one of our biologists. And that is Henry Gill, our technician," he said. They both shook my hand, neither making eye contact as they did. "Hey Cap, where's Abby?" James asked. "Still in Section B? She's not doing too well, as I'm sure you can understand," he responded. James nodded. "Let's talk," Robert said as he gestured for me to follow. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit up with lights that flickered and constantly creaking emitting from the walls. It looked disproportionate, considering how large it all had seemed from the outside. And as a rather tall guy, I had to crouch down to keep my head from knocking into the ceiling. "I'm sorry about the grim mood," Robert said. "It's the first time we're dealing with something like this. I'm assuming they told you about the situation on the surface?" he asked. "They did, but I have to admit I'm a bit fuzzy on the details." "As are we." Mike put himself in lockdown as soon as he returned to the station, and we haven't had clearance to open it yet. "Hey, Mike didn't give any good reasons, I asked. He never got a chance. He fell over dead in the second he hit a button. Robert leads us into a central dome, in contrast to the hallways. It was a pleasant surprise, a large living space filled with furniture and personal effects. Had it not known better, I could have believed it was still on the surface. Mike discovered some microorganisms down in the trench, a new type of parasite, he said. He claims that they were able to withstand any amount of pressure, which isn't a surprise down here, but he also explained that they were completely unaffected by rapid changes in the environment. Robert said as we headed inside an office. Did it believe it was contagious? I asked. Seeing as he was a microbiologist, I can't really come up with another phantomable conclusion. Needless to say, we destroyed all of the samples, but we still don't know why he put himself in lockdown. Robert sighed, but that's not the strangest thing. I waited patiently for him to continue. While he tried to form words, he clearly had trouble believing himself. We lost him down in the trench for 3 entire days. The tracking system failed, and the comms went down. We did whatever we could, but it was futile. Even if we had found him, he only had enough oxygen for 10 hours. So we presume he had died. Then, out of nowhere, his tracker reappeared in our systems, showing that he was moving back up to Tonga elevator. And though he never responded to any of our attempts at contacting him, he was clearly alive. How? It's impossible, yet it happened. Once we let him into the station, he simply locked it down and fell over dead on the ground. Before Robert could continue, the technician walked into the office. When you examine him, be careful not to damage the EPM suits. This is hardly the time, Henry, Robert commanded, glaring at him. I'm just saying this is a billion-dollar project. Why don't you go get the equipment from our doctor here? Robert demanded, getting more agitated by the minute. Look, Captain, if you would just let me go in the airlock, I could take all the necessary precautions. Absolutely not. Do you think headquarters would have sent a damn CDC if they thought we could handle it? For Christ's sake, Henry knew your limits. The technician left and quickly returned with a modified hazmat suit and some surgical supplements. We moved on towards Section B. Unlike the hallways we had traversed before, these were large and well lit up. As we arrived at the airlock, we found Abby standing before the glass door, staring longingly at Mike's lifeless body. Abby, Robert said. I know, it's time, she responded, and she turned around. Oh, you're the doctor? She asked. Her eyes were red and her voice trembling. I nodded. You'll figure out what did this to him, won't you? I just don't understand. Abby, why don't you come with me while they work? Robert said. You don't need to see this. As Robert led her back to the central dome, Henry stared. Henry started unpacking the cart of medical supplies, including isolation drapes and the hazmat suit. Alright, I'm going to guide you through this. No need to mess up a perfectly good EPM suit. Henry said. What does EPM mean anyway? I asked. Exoskeletal pressure modular, Henry said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. James and Jennifer helped to seal the hazmat suit, while Henry hung up the isolation drapes. I stepped through, while Jennifer entered the coast behind me to open the airlock. My ears popped as they sealed the door shut behind me. Both of the drapes and the airlock were transparent, meaning they could observe anything I did, in addition to mount the camera on my shoulder for closer view, displayed on a monitor on the other side. Just by the control panel, Mike lay dead, wearing a massive black suit, looking more like a robotic piece of machinery than diver's gear. There were several cables and hooks hanging from the ceiling, and just turning him over was a massive task, as we weighed about half a ton wearing the suit. His face was pale as a sheet, with thin streaks of blood pouring from every available orifice. The eyes were red from conjunctival bleeding, completely ridding them from any white. I'm ready, I said. Alright, the first thing you need to do is simply inspect the suit. Look for any breaches of integrity. It shouldn't be possible, but in the unlikely event that something broke through, a self-healing mesh should have formed. It looks kind of grey. I looked over every inch of his suit from top to bottom. There, his feet, Henry yelled. Sure enough, there was a patch of grey that stood out from the matte black metal covering the rest of him. Something actually perforated his suit, Henry said, surprised. I got closer, giving them a better view on the monitor. Clearly, the puncture wasn't what killed him though, he added. I had to agree with the assessment. Any breach not sealed off within a nanosecond would immediately crush him, but it seemed that the mesh had replaced whatever penetrated the suit at the same time as it was removed. Next, attach the cables to his shoulder. They are color-coded, so it should be easy enough. I attached the cables as instructed, which caused the suit to light up and start unhanging. The front of the suit opened up, revealing Mike's completely mangled body. What the hell? James asked. That's not pressure damage, Henry responded. Mike's ribs were broken outwards, though they had not torn apart his flesh. His chest seemed to expand to almost twice its normal size. I continued to remove the helmet. Pulling it off his head, I looked into the eyes of a brief moment, baffled as though what could have caused the internal organs to initially explode. For the briefest of moments, it seemed like his eyes moved to meet my gaze. Did you just see that? I asked. No one said a word. We all just stared at Mike, waiting for something to happen. His eyes moved again, darting in random directions as he started gargling, violently contracting his chest. God, he's still alive? Jennifer asked. He opened his mouth, letting thousands of massive worms pour out into the ground. They immediately crawled in every direction, up to the walls, onto the ceiling, desperately searching for a way out. Mike continued to spew out more slimy worms, his mouth tore open in the process, leaving his jaw completely unhinging before falling off. Once all the worms seemed to have exited his corpse, his chest tore open, revealing even larger worms. It quickly became apparent that all of his organs had been consumed, replaced with these disgusting creatures. Some of them even started clinging to my suit as I sweated at them in panic. None of the others knew what to do. They could only stare at me, flaying around. As the worms touched each other, their flesh temporarily fused, forming longer versions of themselves, growing in size and then breaking off again. They warped around my arms and legs. I begged for someone to help me, but what could they do? "Hang in there!" Henry yelled as he fumbled with the panel of the airlock. Within seconds, a small tabs emerged from the ceiling, spewing what I could only assume was liquid nitrogen. Whatever it was, the worms froze in place, freezing to the point where I could break them into tiny pieces. I only took a moment, but all the worms had been killed off, and though my suit had partially protected me from the cold, I collapsed, exhausted and shivering onto the ground. "Get me the fuck out of here," I demanded, knowing fully well they couldn't do that until I had dealt with the infestation. Robert had just returned in time to see what the commotion was about, and upon seeing what remained of Mike lying torn in pieces on the ground, he stopped in his tracks. After a minute of catching my breath, I got some sense back. With some morbid sense of humor and functioning on autopilot, I turned towards Henry. "Sorry, but the suit isn't going to be salvaged. We're educating the whole fucking airlock as soon as I get out of here." Henry turned to Robert, pleading for him to make me reconsider, despite what we had all just witnessed. But Robert took my side. After removing the recording unit from the EPM suit, I panicked the entire thing into an easily ejectable container, while making sure that no worms remained on my suit. All I took was a small sample of a frozen worm, packed into a vacuum container. I exited the airlock and handed the sample off to Jennifer. She had prepared the previous parasite brought back from Mike, and I told her to get everything ready so I could determine what we were dealing with. Robert started the procedure of the ejecting airlock's contents, including what remained of Mike and the EPM suit, Henry pouting the whole time. James hadn't moved an inch since the event. He turned sickly pale, as if he just realized the severity of the situation. "We have to tell him, Captain," he said quickly after a few minutes. "Tell me what?" I asked while getting out of the hazmat suit. Robert took a deep breath, mugging over his options. "You're right. Tell me what?" I repeated. Death can be a beautiful thing, beyond all the stigma associated around the event. It's the beginning of a world that starts directly from the end of another. When a whale dies in extreme depths, they sink towards the ocean floor, when entire ecosystems arise from their decomposing bodies. This is called a whale fall. Mike's EPM suit had left behind 3 days' worth of footage. Henry was put on the task of preparing it for viewing. While we couldn't save him, nor the suits, we could at least figure out how Mike died. As we waited, the captain decided it was time for me to learn the truth about the mission, and why no one on the surface had ever heard about the scientific wonder but was Talos. You saw all the dead sea creatures littering the ocean floor around the station? Robert asked. I recalled the hundreds of mangled bodies of fish. Not the most welcoming sight to the abyss. James told me something compelled him to dive down here. Some sort of sound. Robert nodded as he pulled up a computer. After a moment of fumbling, he clicked on the sound file. About 5 years ago, we recorded this coming from the depths of the Tonga Trench. It was an oddly synthetic sound, while a whale's matching call had been pitched down and jumbled around. And in the midst of it, all there was, something sounded like a whisper. They recorded something similar around the Marina Trench and called it biotwang, Robert said. The sound played on a loop as we talked. Oddly eerie for something so innocent. We first thought it came from a whale, just a bit distorted after traveling vast distances, or instrumental interference. But then we saw how it affected the wildlife in the region. Blooms of jellyfish appearing out of nowhere, and fish defying all instincts to dive towards crushing pressure. What made the sound then? I asked. Robert pulled up some pictures on the screen. Creatures similar to roundworms, but pitch black. They looked nothing like what I just witnessed in the airlock, however. From what we can tell, there's a thus far completely undiscovered ecosystem somewhere down the trench, isolated for millions of years, unaffected by mass extinction events. They have evolved quite differently from life we see on the surface. It's like millions of single-celled organisms working together to form more complex creatures. But unlike ourselves, the cells can detach and rejoin at will. We've named it the syncytium. That's what killed Mike? They could be part of it, but what we just saw in the airlock is far larger than the microorganisms we've gathered here. Before we could continue, James interrupted, letting us know that the footage was ready to be viewed. If they ever decide to classify the existence of this station, they never mentioned the creatures, nor the sounds that alerted us to their presence. I'm sure one day they hail this all as a supreme technological advancement. But truth be told, the reason why the Navy put billions and billions of dollars into this project, so that humanity could transfer the ocean floor, is simply because they want to find whatever is making that sound, and find a way of using it. Cap, they're waiting for us, James said. We gathered in the central area. Abby sat in the back, some distance away from everyone else. She seemed even worse for wear than before, frail, as if she'd lost weight in the past couple of hours since meeting her. Henry controlled the footage, ready to speed through the important bits as the descent itself was quite slow. 20,000 feet, the Hadal zone. Everything we saw would be from Mike's point of view. The footage started at the airlock, Abby standing before him with a concerned expression on her face.
Don't worry, I'll be back before you know it. It's not like it's my first time in the depths. It's not like they'd waste $1 billion on me dying anyway.
She didn't seem consoled by his words. This time it's different. We haven't tested the suit beyond 30,000 feet yet, Abby said.
No, but we've tested pressure. The suit should be able to go much further before breaking.
Henry forwarded the footage. Mike stood directly at the edge of the Tonga Trench. To his left, platform extended even further down towards the Hadal zone. An elevator sat at the platform center. A short distance down the trench, he saw endlessly long tendrils gently swaying with the current. They belonged to the body of the malformed creature, looking like it couldn't possibly control its own appendages. Yet, it seems unfazed by the depths.
Guys, have you seen this?
He said excitedly as he pointed at the bizarre being.
It's a Magnapinna squid.
He almost jogged along at the edge to get a better view. The suit's undoubtedly exhausted by the effort. Don't put too much strain on the suit, Henry interjected over the radio.
It will be fine. What else did they pay for?
Mike asked. As he got closer to the squid, another popped up behind him. One with even larger appendages.
Damn, I never thought I'd see one so close.
Stop messing around and get on the elevator, Henry demanded.
Fine, let's not enjoy our jobs then,
Mike responded. He boarded the elevator and strapped himself in. The journey would take him another 15,000 feet into the abyss. It was a large, sturdy piece of machinery, able to withstand the immense pressure of the dreaded Hadal zone. Mike himself would control the speed of the descent, only handing the control to Henry, should something happen. Not long after the descent started, Mike started the elevator.
The suit is making weird noises.
That's normal, it's just adjusting the pressure change. We told you that it would happen the deeper you got, Henry explained with an annoyed tone.
Yeah, I know, but...
You'd be fine. 27,000 feet. Once more, Mike stopped the elevator, directing his gaze at the edge sticking out from the cliffside. On it lay a corpse of a bow-headed whale, almost half a planet away from its natural habitat. The whale had been partially hollowed out, riddled with deep sea eels and tiny eyeless fish, an entire ecosystem thriving from its death.
How did the whale get here?
Mike asked. It died, like all the other creatures down here, Henry said.
Yeah, but it's a bowhead. At least I think it is. Don't you live around the Arctic?
Henry sighed. Just continued the descent. 35,433 feet, horizon deep. The elevator reached the bottom from the trench after about an hour, allowing Mike to finally unbuckle himself from his seat. He grabbed a box of beacons to allow the next person to easily navigate the area. After stepping off the platform and getting away from the bright lights, it became abundantly clear that the bottom of the ocean was far from empty, and that the entire bed was covered with previously undiscovered life. Millions of fungal-like plants covered the floor, and a transparent fat shrimp swimming between, apparently feeding off them. On the cliff wall itself, thousands of bioluminescent plants extended, just a stalk with a blue bulb bending in the direction of Mike's movement. It was hauntingly beautiful, looking as alien as anything from another planet. He continued along the cliffsides, putting down a beacon every 100 feet or so.
I half expected this place to be horrible,
Mike said.
You know, being named as the god of the underworld and all.
No one responded to his comments.
Guys, you can still hear me, right?
Yes, Mike, we can hear you, Henry said. We're here to work, not to make stupid quips.
Has anyone ever told you how much better life can be if you just at least enjoy it, Henry? stop being such a killjoy. We're making history down here.
Henry didn't respond.
How about you hand Abby the radio? Hell, I'd rather listen to the captain ramble about protocol going on and on.
Mike stopped dead in his tracks, reaching the end of the cliff. Before him was a steep fall, leading down to an endless chasm of darkness.
Henry, are you sure the elevator took me all the way down the trench?
He asked as he stared into the abyss. Yes, you're at 35,000 feet.
Well, it's just that I'm standing at the edge of the cliff, and there's clearly not a bottom of the ocean.
That's impossible. We surveyed the area with a sonar.
Well, I'm telling you.
The ground beneath Mike crumbled into pieces. He slid off the edge of the cliff and dove further into the deep. The darkness now surrounded him was absolute. Nothing could possibly help him orient himself as he fell. The fall in the ocean was a much slower process, giving him time to think what kind of fate awaited him as he sank to the depths, never before known by mankind. He called out for his crew members, while desperately clawing at the cliff, but even with the suit, he was unable to slow his descent. As he got deeper, the suit started emitting loud beeps, alarms to alert rapid pressure changes, exceeding 16,000 psi. But before he could even react, he hit the ground hard. Mike fell silent, passed out from the impact. Unknown feet. The void. Minutes after landing, at unknown depths, Mike awoke to the sound of his suit beeping. The sound had held its ground and was starting to adjust to a new pressure. The manometer had broken, and with this tracking device malfunctioning, we could only try to guess how far he had fallen. Mike grunted as he got to his feet, taking some time to figure out what had happened.
Henry, you there?
He finally said. No response.
Captain? Anyone?
Apart from a few malfunctioning instruments, most of the suit seemed intact, yet no contact could be made within the base. Everything past that point would be after comms went down, and we had patiently awaited to learn of Mike's fate. Despite having fallen beyond what we believe to be the ocean floor, he had just landed on another plateau, with an endless distance still progressing downwards. The abyss was now present, taunting us with emptiness.
Please respond!
He begged, defeated. He activated the beacon still attached to him to check his surroundings. He had landed directly in the front of a cave, leading inside the cliff wall and moving steeply upwards. While protocol strictly dictated that wait for rescue in these situations, we could hear gargling sounds emitting from the cave. Whatever it was, it compelled Mike decided to check out the cave. The walls inside were perfectly smooth, an impossible formation of rocks reflecting the bright lights shining from the EPM suit. Lighting up the cave as far as it stretched, Mike started at the shiny walls for a moment, adjusting the light. It had seemed smooth at an angle, but when the light was pointed directly at them, it uncovered bizarre patterns, like symbols not corresponding to any known language. While he studied the symbols, a loud sound shook through the cave, almost sweeping Mike off his feet. It sounded similar to the biotwang, but with slight differences. The rhythm was changed. It seemed to put Mike further into trance, and he delightedly followed the source, ignoring any change of rescue the further he went in. The cave led to a much larger cavern, extending beyond the reach of any light source he had available. Unlike the tunnel, these walls weren't smooth, but were covered in millions of tiny holes, each perfectly round, each identical to the last. Upon closer inspections, the holes weren't empty, but filled with worms, just like the ones we had seen spew out of his body inside the airlock. They wrinkled and reached for Mike as he walked through the cavern, pulled towards the sound in the distance, getting louder with each passing step. The deeper he got in, the less he seemed distracted by the holes, which were growing in size alongside the worms. Mike's only hypnotic objective was to reach the sound. On top of the worms, spinningly, long-legged creatures walked across. They looked like shell-less spider crabs, dipping their limbs into the worms, merging temporarily while seeming to feed them. For each dip into the holes, their limbs grew shorter while the worms expanded. Eventually, he reached a corner of the cavern, and with it, the source of the sound. It was a half-consumed whale calf attached to the wall, bound by hundreds of massive worms, extending into its torn flesh. Despite being half-eaten and broken beyond any chance at life, it somehow didn't succumb, as if the worms themselves kept it alive. Involuntary life support, repurposed for their own needs. The calf gaped open its half-eaten jaw, so mangled Mike could see straight into its vocal cords, which were also covered in worms, tugging and moving them into position. The whale screamed, emitting another jumbled sound that pulled Mike even closer. While Mike was distracted, several worms had emitted from the holes, rapidly swarming around him. Within seconds, they had joined together, wrapping around his legs and climbing up to the suit. They temporarily brought Mike back to sanity as he tried to tear off the worms, but they were fast, far faster than him, trapped inside a slow metal box. He stumbled to the ground, allowing more worms and the spinless to cover each of his limbs. The creature merged together, forming a sheet of flesh that soon covered the entirety of his body. Mike fell silent, and the camera showed nothing but a flesh-colored mass, muffling any sound save from Mike's panicked breath. He screamed as loud bang almost broke the speakers. The sound of his suit being perforated and the mesh refilling the hole he had found on the sole of his feet. The creature had gotten inside the suit, digging into his flesh, Mike crying in agony before falling silent. We all stood speechless in front of the monitor, now displaying nothing but a timer, proving the camera was still running. Abby had left, with James following the console. "That can't be it," Robert said. "Let me forward it," Henry said, half whispering in shock. We forwarded through almost 3 days of nothing, while the worms incubated inside Mike, trapped along in the cavern, no one knowing where he was. The camera started clearing up, the flash sheet peeling off as the view showed that Mike had returned to the elevator. During the 3 days down the trench, the Synxium had occupied, covering it with the fleshy appendages, while Mike was controlling it, or whatever remained of him inside the suit. He wandered towards the station, flakes of cynical flesh falling off him for every step. His crew called out for him over the radio now that he could reach them, but Mike could do nothing but goggle as worms had consumed most of his lungs. At the airlock he stumbled inside, ready to unleash hell within the station. But for a brief moment, Mike mangled to halt himself. Perhaps he thought of hurting those he loved was enough for him to temporarily gain control. Just enough time to shut down the airlock, putting himself into lockdown. Mike collapsed to the ground. He had died days ago, but his will remained even as he turned into nothing more than a vessel for the horrors he now carried within him. The footage ended. We stood in silence for a moment. None of us dared to speak a word about Mike's cause of death. I hardly believed it, despite having almost fallen victim to the same fate. "Henry, call headquarters. Tell them we're shutting this project down," Robert said, breaking the silence. "Jennifer, destroy the sample from the airlock. It's still sealed, right?" Jennifer nodded before heading towards the lab. "We need to make sure that whatever this is, it stays in the abyss." I joined Henry as he attempted to call headquarters. The radio returned nothing than jumbled static. Robert was checking all security feeds, sending out drones to scavenge for the synchron at the elevator. "Captain, the comms are completely down. Can't get any signal." On the security feed, we saw that the flesh of the synchron had been stretched along the ground, covering some of the corpses of the fish that littered the ocean floor. It was impossibly large, using the elevator and platform as a scaffold for climbing up towards the station. A loud mechanical clang sounded throughout the station, followed by an alarm. "What the hell was that?" I asked. "Yawl breach, Sector C," and an automatic voice said. "Isolate it," Robert demanded. "What about just do it?" he continued. Henry frantically tried to navigate the security system, attempting to get an idea as to the extent of the damage. "It's the lab, fucking hell! I hope Jennifer didn't get there yet," Henry said. While the station sealed, trapping anyone inside, another loud bang shook us. The alarm sounded again. "Hull breached, Sector B." Fuck! What now?" Henry asked. Robert stood still in shock, frozen by the decision of saving the station or fleeing. "We have to evacuate," was all he could say. Most of my old crew, after leaving the Navy, struggled to get over their longing for the ocean. Such was the case for my submarine captain, Louis Jason. He always claimed that the sea would be his final resting place, where he truly belonged, and following his honorable discharge, he went straight into hyperbaric pipeline welding. It's a dangerous job, where the only enemy is invisible, always stalking each new mission, a foe that can't be sensed, but with an ability to destroy everything you are in a split second. Pressure. Maybe I'm cursed, unable to live on land with my own people, but at least I'll die where I belong, he had said. Jason would be lucky enough to forever be united with his one true love, at the sight of a burst pipe that took him away, finally making him one with the deep blue. It's funny how the brain operates as everything around you is falling to pieces, far beyond your own control. Once there's nothing left you can do, the mind turns into a place of safety, fond memories from a time long since past. For me, those memories belonged to my time of service, to my old captain and crew. It wasn't an easy time, but it was filled with purpose, with my problems solely confined to the ocean. When Robert yelled at me to get my ass in gear, I finally snapped back into reality. "Doc, come on, we need to get the hell out of here," he shouted. James returned to his central dome alongside Abby. They had heard the alarms, but hadn't the faintest idea about what had occurred to the brief absence. "Get to Section A. There are always still 2 transport capsules. Get number 05 ready for departure and wait for me," Robert said. "Cap, what are we going to do?" James asked. "Jennifer is in lockdown. I'm going to get her." "What if the creatures got inside?" Abby asked. Robert thought for a moment before handing her the walkie. "If you don't hear from me within 15, just leave," he ordered. The station shook as another hole was torn through one of the sections. My ears popped from the shockwave. "I'm coming with you," James said. "You're not facing them alone. No, we need you to pilot a transport capsule. If you get hurt, we're stuck down here." It wasn't an invalid excuse. They all knew fully well that the submarine was easy enough for any of the crew members to maneuver. But Robert refused to risk any more lives, and would use whatever reason he could come up with. "Cap, please, that's an order. Get out of here now!" He hesitantly agreed and started leaving. "I'll join you then. I know nothing about the situation or the sub, but I can at least assist you, should something happen," I said, knowing he could come up with an excuse to stop me. He reluctantly agreed, and together we headed for the labs in Section C, worrying that Jennifer might be trapped behind the airlock, or worse. Drowning is a horrible way to die. Once you realize that there is no way to reach the surface, that you are trapped in a cold dark tomb, your throat simply closes up. No matter how hard you try to inhale, your body simply refuses, even as the agonizing pain of running out of air overpowers your natural instinct to breathe. You simply refuse to give in to the overwhelming desire. It isn't until your body starts shutting down and the corners of your vision start to darken that you reach the breaking point, and your brain decides to pull something in, regardless of whether air is present or not. Suddenly ice-cold water flows in through your throat, unstoppably filling your lungs, so desperate for air. It's a clumsy, painful way to go, and by the time water has filled each alveoli, most are still conscious, with just enough time to regret the decision, ever entering the ocean. I thought that it was funny, as we ran through the airlock, that at least we wouldn't drown. Surely the worms would consume us, or the pressure from the collapsing station would instantly crush us. How did the hull get breached anyway? I asked as we got closer. It's supposed to be impossible, but I'm sure it's those fucking monsters, Robin said. The alarm had stopped, alerting us about the hull breach, and was now recommending a station-wide evacuation. Warning! Hull integrating severely compressing all crew reports to designate docking stations. It said. How much time do we have? Not enough. As we turned to the corner at Section C, we saw Jennifer sitting against the wall at the wrong side of the airlock. It took a moment to realize the horrors of her situation. We saw her legs fused with the flesh of the syncytium. They had started eating away her lower body, digging away through her flesh and rapidly replacing her organs with their own meat. Despite all of this, she remained conscious. "Jen!" Robert said, the only words he could muster from the shock of what lay in front of our eyes. She slowly turned her head towards us, with her eyes red from crying, as worms had consumed her insides. "Captain, is that you?" she said, weakly, blind from blood filling the inside of her eyes. "I'm here, Jen. I guess the sample wasn't dead after all." She joked with a hoarse voice as she coughed up what could only be a mixture of blood and lungs. "Maybe tell the doc to double check these things in the future." "He's here with me now," Robert explained. "I'm so sorry, Jen, but I know there's nothing left to do. I guess this is just it." She coughed up, violently spewing out pieces of her lung and worms. "Don't worry, Captain. It's not your fault that a monster from the abyss crawled its way up to destroy us," she said. She said, voice cracking as she writhed agony. I looked over at Robert. He looked horrified, but couldn't take his eyes off her. "It really hurts. Please, inject this section," she cried. "I just want it to be over." Robert nodded, forgetting that she couldn't see him. I went over to the control panel. It was fairly easy to use, especially after having witnessed Henry mess with it before. All I needed was a passcode. I thought it wouldn't be right to let Robert essentially execute her himself. "I'll do it," I assured him. "Rob?" Jennifer said. "Yes?" "Don't let these fuckers get out of the surface. Promise me that much." "I promise." Her abdomen started bulging out. She screamed in pain as the worms started tearing open her stomach. "Captain, the code?" I asked. He told me the numbers and I input them without hesitating. Years of watching people suffer a prolonged death, knowing that we could do nothing but pointlessly extend their lives, had me pulling the plug. Immediately hatches opened up on the walls. An alarm sounded as water started pouring in, but since the hull had already been partially breached, they quickly collapsed in themselves. Within a few seconds, Jennifer had died. "Let us get out of here," Robert said. We ran back towards the central area. We had to transfer the entire station to get towards the section A. It was only remaining escape, but as we got to the office, we could hear something moving within the walls, knocking their way through the pipes. "The pumps!" Robert yelled. "They're getting in through the fucking pumps!" Talos pumps were ancient machinery compared to the rest of the station. As the dome was inserted, they needed to move tons of water outside and immerse pressure, but after finishing the station, they had been long since forgotten, left inside the walls while they installed the more permanent solutions. Before we could react, the walls broke open, and syncytium poured itself through the holes, taking the shape of a malformed flesh, exiting rapidly alongside the walls. They were cut off from our escape, with only the office available as temporarily refuge from the oncoming swarm of worms and flow of flesh. But our safe haven would quickly become nothing more than another prison of extending our survival. It won't hold him for long, Robert said. What now? Robert went straight for his desk, pulling the pistol off the top drawer. You brought a gun to the bottom of the ocean? I asked. You didn't? He shot back. Never know when you might have to quell a mutiny. He laughed nervously. He could tell I wasn't amused, but both knew a gun wouldn't slow them down significantly. But any help was welcome. He continued to rummage through the closet in the room, eventually pulling out 2 unused hazmat suits, just like the one I had used while inspecting Mike. It kept you safe inside the airlock. The worms couldn't penetrate the suit, right? Robert asked with pleading eyes. Look, they breached the EPM suit, made of fucking metal. I don't think these will make a big difference. Might slow them down, but that's it, I said. It's our best shot. The worms had started to pile up on the door, forming and constructing mesh, slightly cracking the glass. It's now or never. James better have the damn sup ready to go, Robert said as we got in the suits. He fired a shot, but not at the door, but at the tempted glass wall beside it, shattering it to a million cubical pieces as we jumped through. I stumbled to the ground, a few worms getting onto my hand as I stood up. Robert pulled them off me and shoved me forward. We spurted to the entrance of Section E. We were far faster than the worms, but they were forming a flash covering most of the ceiling and dropped down on top of us for each step we took. Another hole in the wall bursted open directly above the airlock towards Section A, causing another slump of meat to land on the front of the door. Shit! Robert yelled as he instructively pulled his weapon and fired at the mess on the floor. I froze in place as the worms disintegrated from the bullet's impact, reforming hastily, crawling towards us. I tried to turn away and run, but it didn't react in time. To my surprise, the worms completely ignored my presence and headed straight for Robert, pouring onto him from all directions, pulling him onto the ground. He screamed in agony. They formed around his limbs, making him unable to fight back. I hurried towards him and tried to pull them off, but for each worm I removed, 100 others joined in. Within seconds, they managed to tear a hole in the armpit section of the suit. They immediately wriggled themselves through the hole. I tried desperately to pull him up, but he shoved me away and realized there wasn't any hope left for him. Get out of it, Doc, he glared as blood started to fill his lungs. I didn't even hesitate. Shamefully, I ran for my life while the Sanctum was too distracted by consuming Robert. No matter what I had done, he was already dead. The hallways narrowed drastically as I once more returned to Section E and frantically tried to input the code to close the airlocks. It took me 2 attempts with shaking fingers to get the correct code. Within seconds, the door sealed, and I was once more separated from the abomination on the other side. I'm so sorry, Robert, I whispered to myself. The central dome finally gave in under pressure, massive streams of water quickly collapsing the ceiling. The station fell apart and central power was annihilated under the flood, plunging into darkness and silence. I ventured forward towards the docking station, while each section of Talos supposedly had her own backup generator. For some reason, it hadn't been activated yet in that section, making it hard to navigate through the narrow labyrinths of hallways. "Can anybody hear me?" I called, my voice echoing endlessly. I bumped my head and saw a light appearing in the distance. James came running towards me, holding a flashlight. "Doc, you're still with us. Thank God," he said, his joy quickly fleeting as he realized I had come alone. "What happened? Where's Jen? And the captain?" I just shook my head in response. No words could convey what had happened in the dome, and their absence proved enough. What an unfortunate outcome of futile escape attempts. No time to worry about that now. We need to get out of here. The capsule is just about ready to leave for the surface. We only need Henry to figure out how to get the power back. When we arrived at the docking station, I was relieved by the increase in the ceiling height, if only ever so slightly. Henry was busy at work with the control panel, trying to figure out what had cut the power from the backup generator. Abby standing behind him with a flashlight. "God damn it," he yelled. "Something has stolen away the backup generator. Not sure how, but I'm sure I know what. Fucking abyssal demon spawn," he sighed. Between the lack of power and the damaged hull, the subcan release from the station essentially was stranded here. None of us spoke a word, trapped in a tin can 20,000 feet below the surface with no transport. After what felt like an eternity, Henry finally broke the silence. "There are all great ideas, but that won't work," he said sarcastically in response to our lack of solutions. "Well, do you have any idea, genius?" Abby asked. Henry sighed. "As a matter of fact, I do." He walked into the capsule and started messing around with the electronics, eventually pulling off one of the panels. "There are 3 batteries powering up this sub. And the way I see it, I could take one of them out, and it should still have enough power to get you all to the surface." "Us?" Jamie asked. "I need to connect this battery with the airlock," he continued as he pulled one of them out from the capsule. "Then I'll override the door and blow up from pressure, and then a resulting wave of water should forcefully eject the sub." "What about you?" Abby asked. "Well, someone has to stay behind to follow through with this plan." "Let me do it then," James interjected. "No, you idiots. One wrong connection and the door fries, locking forever. I'm the only one with the expertise." "There has to be another way." "There isn't." "Trust me." James and I looked at each other, both wanting to speak up, but neither able to come up with an alternate solution. Henry wanted to go into the transport capsule and sealed the panel shut again. "I wish you were all smarter. Maybe one of you could have stayed behind," he said, as sarcastically as ever, but for the first time, giving the slightest smirk on his face. "Thank you," I said. "Yeah, well, time for you to go," he said as he shut the door to the capsule. We watched as Henry walked away for the last time, ready to face his fate. An asshole to the bitter end, but one with a kind heart. Like the other perished crewmates, he would forever remain at the ocean basin, never again witnessing sunlight. Time went on forever while we waited for a wave of water that might just as likely crush us in an instant, but with a ton of luck, we'd be ejected out of the station, and from what we could reach the surface, it would be most finally takeoff in the station history, but also the last. Minutes later, we heard a sound from the airlock opening before shattering to pieces under the immense pressure of exploding water in a single flash. It only took about 10 seconds for the wave to hit us, and we stood open from Talos, the hallway behind us falling apart as we did. It hit us hard and roughened us up a bit, but we survived. James took control of the vessel, and I didn't hesitate to start ascending towards the surface. Abby and I stared out of the tiny window. On the other side, we could see the utterly crushed remains of Talos, dimly illuminating by the light still powered up by the generators at Section C, which had been completely covered by the flash of the Synxium. The thousands of corpses of fish that previously littered the ocean floor had been cleaned up, and were now part of an even growing monster from the abyss. A wave of relief washed over me, with a heart calming down for each foot of ascension. I no longer felt the need to constantly look out of the window. The world outside was dark, and whatever life once remained down there had been consumed alongside my longing for the ocean. Once we reached the depths of 5,000 feet, in the middle of the midnight zone, we managed to establish contact with the USS Orion and called for an emergency evacuation. They were quite a distance away, but by the time they reached the surface, they would pick us up. Albeit curious as what happened in the depths. At 3,000 feet, the first rays of sunlight greeted us with the warmth of the sun. The ocean started filling up with a piece of life. Fish thriving in waters, completely ignorant to the horrors and existing directly below them. The vast darkness turning into calm blue. As for the first time since being hired for the mission, I felt safe. Before long, we breached the surface, and we greeted the team, wearing hazmat suits as we boarded the ship. We had been unable to alert them to the situation. All they knew was that a potential contagion existed in the depths. One we could have been brought back with us, so understandably, they locked us up in a sickbay, isolated from the rest of the crew. For 72 hours they pricked and prodded us, taking multiple blood samples and even a CSF probe. After they all returned normal, and no sign of sickness was apparent, they led us into more comfortable living arrangements as we set for shore. After being released from the sickbay, I hardly saw James and Abby. They spent most of their times in the room, only coming out for occasionally interrogation. Headquarters were incredibly curious as to how its state-of-the-art installation suddenly collapsed, as we had absolutely no proof of the event that had transpired. They needed someone to blame, but as part of the CDC and not an original Talos crew who was safe from prosecution. All that was required from me was a sign of a non-disclosure agreement, one I'm breaking now into warning you about the horrors of the abyss. We know more about what exists in outer space than we do about life in our own oceans, and that's how it should remain forever. These creatures, the Synxium, can't be killed as long as one single cell remains. It would be enough to restart the hives, and I fear that with consumption of Talos, they have learned about life at the surface. Now that I'm posting this, I'm heading for the center of disease control. I can feel the worms wriggling inside my chest as I type this, ready to burst out at any moment. I guess the suit didn't protect me after all. I hope James and Abby are safe, that they get a second chance at living a happy life. I am so sorry for all of this, for what's to come.